Hello, welcome. Hey, I'm here. Yo, I think we're live. I think I'm live uh, over here. So it looks like everything is good. I know I've been meaning to do this stream for I don't know a couple weeks now. It seems like it's been sort of hard to uh, find the time to do it. Things have been coming up that are sort of external to my academic affairs. So um, that's personal stuff, is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, I've been meaning to get to this stream for a while, and I kept rescheduling it, and I thought I was going to do it earlier today, and then I thought maybe I'd have to wait till tomorrow. But actually, so here I am, hanging out live, April 22nd, a random 3:33, 3:34 now. Oh, 3:35. Time is flying, literally. So, I guess that since I'm just hanging out right now, I start off with a couple of announcements that I usually start these kinds of streams with. So, um, things that are coming up. So a couple of things that are kind of cool and consciousness live related, um, which you can see, I think, over there in my live tab. So next week on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. I have Arnold Zuboff, who I'll be speaking with. Zuboff is a very interesting guy. I've had a couple Zoom talks with him privately, and we agreed to do one for my Consciousness Live. He has a book that's coming out where he defends what he calls universalism, which is the idea that there's only one um, self, uh, and that self is me or you, or that we are all the same self, or something like that. So understanding exactly what universalism is trying to say can be challenging. But he's written a whole book on this, and we'll be talking about that. I actually found out about Zuboff because of a student that I had named Michael Garcia, who was very interested in. He didn't call it universalism, but he was basically working on some similar idea, and because of through his research found Zuboff. And okay, so for those who know me, I tend to be kind of an old school um, skeptic about the self. I sort of think the self is a neural fiction, doesn't really exist. There's no such thing as the self in a deep sense, and is my sort of considered view. But I find it interesting and challenging to think about personal identity, and so therefore, I find it fun to talk to people who have views about that. So that's what we'll do Tuesday, the 29th, with Arnold Zuboff. I guess the lore is that he came up with the Sleeping Beauty problem. If you know about this in philosophy, um, I don't think this is widely known because when I mentioned this to someone, they said, no, that was Adam Elga. And then in the Elga paper, he actually in a footnote mentions that he got the idea from Stallnacher, and apparently Stallnacher got the idea from Zuboff. I don't know, so I'll ask him about that. But if you don't know about the Sleeping Beauty problem, it's an interesting. Usually that Sleeping Beauty problem is interpreted as having something to do with whether probabilities are subjective or objective. But Zuboff wants to use it to argue for his universalism, the view that there's only one self, which is you. Uh, and me, that we're the same self in some sense, or whatever that means. Okay, anyway, so that's Zuboff. That should be fun and exciting. And then the Tuesday after that, which is May the 6th, I'll be having Jake Quilty Dunn come by and talk with me. And that's also at 1 o'clock, Tuesday, May 6th. So Jake is a very interesting philosopher, very cool guy. He started at the Graduate Center as sort of, I think I was done already when he got there. I don't know, but I'm still hanging around, and he's a very good musician. I had the privilege of jamming with him a couple times, but he's also very much involved in this kind of um, resurgence of the language of thought hypothesis. He's defended that. He's got some interesting things to say about Ned Block's recent arguments, the border between perception and cognition. and generally philosophical psychology and the nature of the mind and thinking and that sort of stuff. So that should be very cool. That's May 6th um, at 1 p.m. And then also just one quick, well, two more actually. One penultimate announcement. The very next day on May 7th, as you know, I teach at LaGuardia CUNY College, CUNY College, at LaGuardia Community College, which is part of CUNY, as well as at the Graduate Center. And the 7th, we are having at LaGuardia our undergraduate philosophy conference, and I will be doing um, an in-person consciousness live at the LaGuardia undergraduate conference, where my guest will be Andre Bukharev. I think that's how you say his name, although I will find out for sure soon. Andre Bukharev is a philosopher emeritus college, and I'm hoping to live stream this in-person event. In fact, earlier today, I was on Amazon purchasing um, wireless mics so that I can, and a tripod, so that I can hopefully try to mic us up, and we'll be in person sitting there in front of an audience, and live stream that. So that's my ultimate goal. If it doesn't work out, maybe I'll just record it and then post the recording afterwards. But I'm hoping that I can do it live, stream it. I mean, live stream it. So we'll see. But anyway, it should be an interesting conversation. So the next couple of weeks, lots of consciousness live coming up. So that's very cool. I was generally aiming to do one consciousness live a month. So I guess, having two in the first week of May is not exactly what I was aiming for, but, still very cool. And then after that, I have one other scheduled consciousness live so far. And that's with Maja Spinner. I'll find out again how to pronounce her name. But she wrote a book on introspection and the trustworthiness and use of it in the sciences, all sorts of interesting things related to introspection. So I'll be talking with her about her work, and that is June 11th. Um, June 11th, and I believe we haven't settled on a time. Although I have to check emails about that. Otherwise, I think if we had settled on a time, I would have put the YouTube placeholder video up. Okay, anyway, and then I have also. BU He has agreed to come on over the summer in July or August. And BU is a neuroscientist at NYU, and she's done very interesting work trying to decode activity from the prefrontal cortex, and is interested in consciousness and has been developing some views about that. So I'll have BU on. And then I have a whole list of other people that I would like to invite. The problem with inviting people is that they tend to say yes. And then I end up doing like 4 or 5 of these a month. Um, in an ideal world, I would love to do one a week, Consciousness Live. I was doing one a week for a period of time there, but it's hard to do when I'm teaching and commuting and all of that other stuff. So, as I've often complained, I wish that someone would count this as a class and let me do it as part of my job. But anyway, until then, it's a hobby, and I enjoy doing it, so I don't mind. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I haven't sent out invites for past July uh, because I'm sort of waiting until we get closer towards June and stuff like that to see who's around. But anyway, so if you have any recommendations that people I should reach out to, I'm pretty open to talking to anybody about consciousness or anything related to the mind. I know it's called Consciousness Live, but I generally sort of think of um, the mind and consciousness as going together because you could talk about the unconscious stuff. And okay, anyway, so I have a whole, let's see, on my list of, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So I have 14 kind of names that I have come up with, people I want to reach out to. So if you have anyone you want to recommend that I reach out to them, I certainly will. That's how I found Bernardo Kastrup. I'd never heard of Bernardo, but someone on the channel said maybe you should reach out to him and talk with him. And so I did, and then we did. So I'm always interested in hearing about that. Oh, I have one other person who's agreed to come on, and that's Barbara Montero. She has a book that's coming out, or she's working on it currently. Um, so Barbara Montero, I think is, she's interested in physicalism and the body. She wrote a book called The Body Problem, but she has a new book, a book coming out. She's a professional dancer as well, I believe, and has done some interesting things about philosophy and dance and movement and the body and so forth. But her current book that she's working on is sort of aimed at deflating the debate between physicalism and dualism, and trying to argue for the idea that there's maybe nothing at stake there. So it's an interesting and challenging idea that there's nothing that you would seem it makes all the difference in the world, physicalism or dualism or panpsychism or idealism. And her kind of view is no, actually, there's nothing too exciting about that, and nothing about the world can be learned from the philosophy in this area. So I think that's an interesting challenge to a lot of the stuff that's going on. Anyway, so lots of exciting things related to Consciousness Live coming up. I think that's. Oops, sorry, I was getting an email on my phone. Why don't I turn this phone off? One might wonder, but when we'll eventually get to that. Okay. Anyway, so let's see what's up. Hey, Pooja, how you doing? Tim, good to see you guys. Glad you could stop by. Sorry for all the uh, um, dodging of the stream. It's been personal issues, as I mentioned before. So let's see. Oh, and there's Noveus. How do you say that? No, Novi, Nove. Hello. And did Hedda really defend universalism? Um, yeah, I've had Hedda on before, so that's a good suggestion. But I would happily have her back. Um, she's a great philosopher in my opinion, and very smart and fun to talk to. So that'd be a great idea. I didn't know that she was defending universalism. So cool. Um, Also, Helen Yetter Chappell, or Chappelle, or however you say that guy's name. She has a book on idealism coming out. I wanted to have her on too, but I don't know. Sometimes I reach out to people and they say no. There's a couple of people who have said no, so that almost a relief. Less work for me. But anyway, so I do reach out to a lot of people. Um, let's see. Pooja says, why most theories of consciousness still assume that self consciousness is solely the only condition of possibility of existence of consciousness within any entity. Um, I guess I wouldn't say that most theories of consciousness assume that. Uh, which kind of theories are you? So I guess we'd have to know more about what you're assuming. So, like higher order theories, I think generally assume that some kind of self consciousness is involved. And then there's definitely certain versions of higher order theories that are more committed to that than others, like self representational theories, I guess. Um, seem a little bit more committed to that. Some versions, like Rocco Gennaro's version of the wide intentionality view, definitely invoke a kind of self consciousness. Others don't, and in fact, I think you could have a version of higher theory that didn't mention self consciousness at all. I kind of defend that possibility in my recent book. Oh, by the way, guys, um, the book is officially out. Uh, so just so you can see it, um, I have a lot of copies of it. So as you can see over there, they sent me a whole stack of these physical copies. I don't know anybody who reads a physical book in the year 2025, but I have a lot of them. I did toy with the idea of like trying to do a giveaway. It's $100 for this damn book. I mean, that seems like a lot. My theory is that Oxford University Press is selling these to libraries, and therefore packaging it as a part of a deal and making a lot of money from the library purchases. And then hopefully someday they'll put out a paperback book, which could be affordable to an average book reader. But I've had several friends of mine say, "Oh, I'm going to buy your book, but it's $100." I'm like, yeah, I know. I have no choice or control on that. But I did toy with the idea of kind of doing a giveaway. So maybe I should think of something that would be worthy of receiving one of these crappy books that I wrote. The only drawback is that I would have to pay for shipping and bring it to wherever you bring things to mail them. I don't even know. The post office, the UPS, FedEx. I have no idea. Throw it in the air and hope a carrier pigeon grabs it. Anyway, so that's kind of cool that the book is out. Very, very exciting. So I was the reason I brought up the book was simply because in it I defend the idea that you could have a higher order theory of consciousness without invoking the self. But I think that a lot of theories of consciousness kind of take it as an obvious starting point that you don't need self consciousness to just have basic level phenomenal consciousness. Um, so I am a bit curious why you think that, Pooja. Why you think most theories still assume that self consciousness is the only condition for the existence of consciousness. It certainly seems, at least intuitively plausible, that you could have um, a Ned Block style um, reductive physicalist theory of phenomenal consciousness that saw no need for self consciousness at the lowest level, at the base level. But still, I guess I would say that the intuition that the self is involved um, is fairly strong if you take the idea that phenomenal consciousness involves a point of view. Whose point of view is it? Got to be the self's point of view. So I do think that. So I find them kind of going together. But I'm also really not a realist about the self. I don't think there's any real sense in which I'm the same person I was when I started this stream, let alone when I was as I was when I was five or whatever. So I just am not really motivated by thinking that the self is real. So anyway, let's see. Is the global workspace theory necessarily a type B materialist theory? No, I guess I'd say it's not necessarily that. Um, so global workspace theory is a theory that invokes the idea of access, and in its more weaker moments, you get the people who defend it saying what they're doing is defending a theory of access consciousness. And so some global workspace theories have kind of denied phenomenal consciousness. Anyway, but not everyone does. So if you take it as a theory of phenomenal consciousness, that a state is phenomenally conscious when it's globally broadcast, that's certainly how I would tend to interpret the version of global workspace theory that I would take seriously. If you interpret it that way, well, then you could try to argue that there is some kind of a priori conceptual entailment between that kind of access and global workspace broadcasting. In fact, I guess I would say that you can kind of read between the lines and see some of the global workspace defenders taking that view when they kind of challenge the idea of phenomenological overflow. There's a kind of response to the so phenomenological overflow is the idea that started with Ned Block, but I would view it as common sense before Block ever started arguing for it. The idea that maybe there's phenomenal consciousness that you don't have access to, that you don't know about, can't report on. So um, if you take that kind of view seriously, then there's something that it's like to have this pain, even if you're completely unaware of the pain. There's something that it's like to hear the birds chirping outside, even if you're not attending to them or not accessing that. In which case, okay, the global workspace theory denies that because it says that consciousness requires access. And sometimes the defenders of that view sort of seem like they think that the opposite view is like contradictory or nonsensical or somehow ruled out a priori because they sort of think to themselves, like, yeah, what does it even mean to say that there's consciousness, but that you don't know about it? And Dennett, I think of as sort of taking this tone of voice sometimes when he argued about this. And I do think of Dennett as having basically a global workspace theory of consciousness with some extra Dennett spices thrown in there involving the intentional stance and and these other things. But the basic idea of fame in the brain, multiple drafts, all that stuff is basically global workspace um, in some form or another. That's my view. We could debate that if anyone's interested, but that's the view I would defend. In which case, there maybe is some kind of conceptual a priori entailment, according to those guys, between this idea that there's got to be access and global workspace. So now so this is just because I don't know how to say your name, so I'm sorry, but it's Noveus. I don't know. Tell me how to say it, and I'll try that. But anyway, so this is just because they asked, is it necessarily a type B theory? And I think no, it could be a type A theory. In fact, I think Dennett kind of had a version of it, and then so that would be not necessarily. Could it also be type C? Um, I don't know. Yeah, type C is kind of, just saying we don't know which, it may be one or the other of B or A. And then, depending on what you mean by theory of consciousness, you could even be a dualist and accept global workspace theory. And sometimes I think of Chalmers as kind of in this camp, since he has argued that availability to working memory might be the neural basis of consciousness. Even though he's a non-physicalist, he thinks maybe it's the case that the non-physical consciousness is always going along with the availability, the broadcasting. So that's a kind of, maybe that's a global workspace-ish non-physicalist view. I don't know. So I think it really would depend on what you meant by a theory of consciousness and where your background assumptions were. So yeah, I don't think that you're really committed one way or the other in global workspace theory to type B materialism if you don't want to be. I like type B materialism. I don't like global workspace theory, but that's maybe a different story. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but feel free to follow up. By the way, I have a Zoom link, so if anyone wants to come live and chat with me, that's fine. I feel guilty doing that sometimes because then I neglect the chat and focus on whoever I'm talking to. But whatever. All right, so let's see. Tim. Oh, by the way, hey Victor, I see, and RO Forever Man, and Zeleny. Hello, guys or gals, as the case may be. Oh my God, I'm choking myself to death. Aha. What's the teaching material for my NYU class? Oh, okay. That's what Tim is asking. So as you guys probably already know, I made the video, the last video I put up, I was kind of jokingly saying that I was replacing Chalmers for two of his classes. So one of the classes, because he's doing this grant thing, and they sent out an email saying, anyone want to teach these classes? And I said, well, all I do is teach, and I could teach those. And surprisingly, they said sure. So there's two classes. One of them is Minds and Machines, and I will probably be using Chalmers's book Reality Plus. Um, so this is an undergraduate class, and I have been using Reality Plus in my undergraduate philosophy class before it was published. I had an advanced copy of it that I was using in my intro to philosophy class. And I was trying to restructure my introduction to philosophy class as a kind of sort of introduction to philosophy through minds and machines, through the question of virtual reality and can minds be uploaded and those sorts of things. Because as he argues in the book, what he calls techno philosophy, the application or the use of technology to sharpen philosophical questions, I think is an important idea. So I'll probably be using that book for that class. I really like the book. I don't agree with everything, but I do agree with quite a bit of it. For example, I agree with the main argument, the conclusion of which is that either um, there's some kind of blocking of conscious simulations ever occurring, or probably we're in a simulation. So my own kind of predilections go more towards the first one. Chalmers goes towards the second one, but I agree that those are probably the options that either. So anyway, so I'll probably be using that book. I enjoy it, and I think it's suitable for undergraduates. I sort of know it, but that's only one class. So the other class has some title. I think it's called Philosophical Applications of Cognitive Science. And I haven't really decided exactly 100% on what I'm going to do for that class. They told me I have a lot of leeway. I can do what I want, basically. And I looked at the way the class was previously taught. So I guess it was taught by Michael Strevens, and he sort of, was seemingly interested in concepts and causation. I am not 100% super excited about the concept debate. I kind of lived through that in the early 2000s with Fodor in New York and all that stuff. So, concepts, what philosophy got wrong, and all the kerfluffle that resulted, prototypes and all that stuff is not super interesting to me. But I agree it's important. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it probably I wouldn't want to teach that. Now, I think Chalmers was teaching that class and doing it in a slightly different way, and you can see the kind of thing that he would want to focus on. So I haven't really, anyway, decided what I'm going to be doing for that applications class. I do think that I want to do some uploading, some practical stuff about uploading and consciousness. I want to do something about neural prosthetics, and I don't know. So I haven't 100% decided. I'm open to suggestions, and I haven't really comprised a reading list. I'm not. These classes aren't until the spring, next spring. So I have some time, and I'm still sort of thinking carefully about what I should be doing there. But I am excited to be doing it. I mean, I already teach quite a bit, but and I've taught classes at NYU before, not the full class, but I worked with Joseph Ledoux, and he taught a class there called the Emotional Brain. And for every year, I would come and do a guest lecture and teach the class. And one time he was out of town, and I had to take it over sort of completely. But anyway, so I sort of know the NYU undergraduates to some degree or other. Um, and anyway, so I'll keep you guys posted as I sort of understand what it is that I'll be doing. Let's see. Pooja asks again, what are the contemporary challenges in the realm of consciousness research? What are the areas that I'm working on these days? Um, so Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that, the one of the primary challenges, there's a couple of them. One of them, centrally, obviously, AI, and whether AIs can be conscious. That's generated a lot of interest for understandable reasons. I know that Anil Seth has a paper coming out in the Behavioral and Brain Sciences (BBS) called "Computational Functionalism, Consciousness, Computational Functionalism, and Biological Naturalism." I don't know. It's something about that. And Seth is trying to make room for the idea that maybe something like biology matters, and that you couldn't duplicate it um, in silicon. And that's a view that I've always really, in the back of my mind, been attracted to. I think that I just, excuse me, I describe it as maybe my last remaining prejudice, because I do think I have a kind of almost, kind of just a predilection to prefer biology as being important as opposed to function or computation. And so Anil is going to having this paper come out, and the BBS is cool because they have this open peer commentary, so you can propose a comment, and maybe they'll let you publish it. And so I'm going to try and write something for that. The basic idea that I have there is that we might have empirical reasons for thinking that the arguments for accepting the kind of computational functional view, which is that you could duplicate the causal structure, functional structure of the brain, and then duplicate the mind. So if you look at Chalmers's recent book, his um, it's over there somewhere. Oh yeah, not constructing the world, but the other one, on consciousness. Anyway, if you look there, he has a footnote where he says, the dancing fading quality argument, he's changed his mind on a little bit because of change blindness. And I sort of thought that, yeah, interestingly, you can make a similar argument based on subjective inflation, where subjective inflation basically is the idea that when you're attending somewhere, the stuff that's outside of your area of attention, you overestimate how much is there. And I think that's a phenomenological sort of thing. And actually, people like Megan Peters and um, Rachel are doing work on this right now, actually, and we're in the midst of trying to get that stuff published. Some experiments that we designed to see whether intentional inflation is a real thing or not, or whether it's not a real thing. It's seeming to be a real thing. The question that is next on our list is, if it's a real thing, where is the mismatch in the phenomenology going to be located, at the level of the visual cortex, or the level of the prefrontal cortex, or somewhere else? So we're looking at those questions. But anyway, so I think subjective inflation is real, in which case the fading qualia argument, I think, can be undermined. Roughly, the idea of the fading qualia argument is that maybe right now your experience is fading out without you noticing it. And Chalmers says that's extremely implausible, but that if that's a result of the um, neural replacement with silicon, then we should reject the idea that there's any change in your experience. So, and the dancing qualia is it blinking in and out of existence, and the fading qualia is it dimming down. He thinks they sort of establish different points. One is about whether there'll be consciousness like mine. The other is whether there's consciousness at all. So I think the empirical work kind of suggests that you could have things fading without noticing, because that's kind of what subjective inflation is. In which case, we have empirical reasons to sort of resist these a priori arguments. You know me, I love to resist a priori arguments with empirical work. So that's one thing that I'm working on. Is I wouldn't say that I think biological naturalism is definitely true. I would say that we haven't really ruled it out, and that the enthusiasm for functionalism may be overblown. So I would like to make room for that to be a serious view, which I appreciate people like Anil doing. And Ned has also been in this area. There are people like Searle further back, but okay, so it's been kind of a rare view in the philosophy of mind. And in fact, most people that I talk to about this think of it as like, I don't know, next to idiotic, that the biology matters, because they sort of think the defining characteristic of the sciences is that we look for the mechanisms and functions. So okay, so I hope to sort of argue that it's not idiotic. So that's one thing, I think, whether AI can be conscious, and or whether something biological is required. I think that's becoming more and more important as we get closer to realizing our goals of making these artificial agents very human-like. Okay, so that's one big challenge. The other challenge is like what theory of consciousness we should accept. And I think, that what I call the central challenge of consciousness science is trying to generate a standard model of the mind, of which things like memory, attention, and consciousness are all a part. And out of the, you know, all the theories of consciousness that neuroscientists take seriously, I think we're sort of at a place in time where we would want to narrow them down, whittle them down, at least to the point where we would write like a good introductory textbook section. Just as an antidote, I teach the introduction to neuroscience class, and we use this book called Brain and Behavior by Kolb and Wishaw. And it's kind of a cool cognitive neuroscience book because it actually has more philosophy in it than I think that maybe other of these types of books do. Um, like they mentioned Jesse Prinz, and they have a whole section devoted to limited materialism. And I think they get some stuff wrong, but still they're open to these ideas. However, when they asked me to review the book, and I said, well, they should update the consciousness area because the science of consciousness has made some strides, and we have some theories that we take seriously, and they should talk about them. And then 3 years later, this new version of the book came out, and the consciousness section was updated, and it focused exclusively, only, and solely on IIT, without doing any sort of survey of the other theories, global workspace theory being by far the most popular one, the biological view, reentrant processing, attention based views, higher order theories. None of those were even mentioned as things that people talk about. So that was very disappointing. And I'm not one of these rabid anti IIT guys. Like I know some of my friends are, but I'm not one. I think IIT is interesting and possibly important. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I'm not, but I don't think it's like pseudoscience or some kind of bullshit or anything like that. So I wasn't like angry to see IIT in the neuroscience textbook. I was angry to see them sort of select that as the theory and not a well balanced sort of survey of the different theories and the issues, which are how would we know whether we should be fans of IIT or higher order theories or go workspace or what? So I think that's a central challenge in the realm of consciousness research is forming it into a field that has a set of questions and methodologies that can answer those questions, whether or not there's a unified theory. I mean, if you look at attention or emotion or any of these other things in the textbooks, there's different views and they canvass them. They say, well, there's this camp, the emotions are cognitive appraisal. There's this camp, emotionals are bodily responses. And these are the evidences that are provided back and forth so that there's a kind of more balanced and they might say, well, this is, most neuroscientists are split between these three views, or most of them favor that view. So it, and it's not that you can do justice to every nuance of every debate in an introductory textbook. I understand that, but having some overview of the area is incredibly important if you want it to be taken seriously, and future people are going to be trained in this area. So I think that's a big challenge, and it hasn't really come. Um, I- we're not doing a very good job at meeting that challenge. So that's the second one. So, what theory of consciousness should we accept? What would count as evidence for it? How should we write these introductory textbooks? Then I would also say phenomenological overflow is still essential issue here. Could there be experience that you don't know about or outside of your access? So these are the sorts of things that I think are still very important. And then, of course, I mean, the flip side of the AI stuff is the other animals, non-human animals. So, what about crickets and bats and all these things? So, I think that we're still at a very exciting area or crossroads. My own view is that we should focus on humans, understand consciousness there before we talk about bats and crickets. But that's not. There's room for disagreement on that. I'm sure there's some other stuff too, but I think that's a good list. So, Zeleny stock says unconscious perception is a thing accepted in science, less weird, but still. I'm not sure on what that's a real reference to, but yes, unconscious perception is debated. So there's not universal agreement, but I think there is kind of a general agreement that there is unconscious perception, but also general agreement that we haven't really demonstrated it conclusively. So that is something that is widely believed in, but undemonstrated. There's some, I would say there's good evidence for it, but I don't think there's anything like approaching conclusive evidence. A lot depends on what you mean by perception. There's certainly unconscious processing of information. I think that's undoubted. But whether that counts as perception is the thing that people um, worry about. I'm okay with unconscious perception. Some people are not. Like, for example, Ledoux says there's no unconscious emotions. Emotions are conscious. They have to be conscious by their nature. There's unconscious threat detection and survival responses, according to Ledoux. Whereas other people, like David Rosenthal, say no, you could have unconscious anger and fear. It's just the same psychological state, just when you're not aware of it. So I do think that that's interesting. The only thing that I really worry about is I want to make sure that higher order theories of consciousness aren't necessarily committed to the idea that there's unconscious perception. I think it's a substantive issue that even if there were no unconscious perception, still these theories might be true. Also, by the way, as people know, I'm not really a true convert to higher order theories. I think they're interesting and sort of misunderstood and underdeveloped. So that's why I spend so much time. And I also happen to study with someone who's a well-known defender of them, an originator of a certain version. So I, have that expertise. But it's not as though I know some people who are like fully. They really can't even. They can't even conceptualize the idea that the consciousness might not be some kind of higher order awareness. To me, it's very easy to conceptualize that it might not be, but of course it might be. So interesting. Let's see, Victor, for you, what kind of relationship is there between representation and consciousness? Super Daniel, okay, is a relationship merely causal or constitutive? Um, yeah. So good question. For myself personally, I take a kind of split mind approach. So I don't really commit myself fully to one particular way of doing things. I don't really see the evidence being strong enough to push me towards one definitive view. So I would say that I kind of, can see different ways things might go. So it could be possibly the case that consciousness is completely independent of representation. Ned Block has this view. People like Ned, and also people like David Papineau, who think that maybe consciousness, conscious states, phenomenally conscious states, states of which there's something that it's like for you to be in, these states may come to have representational content. They may come to represent things, but they don't have it intrinsically or by its nature. But it's a sort of acquired property that they come to have. And Ned's analogy was always with paint. If you take some red paint and you paint a fire hydrant, then that splotch of red is now representing a fire hydrant. But there's nothing like about the redness of the paint that you're using, which represents fire hydrants. So there's nothing intrinsically about the color red paint, which represents that, you might think. So I think that's one possible view. They might be completely distinct. I do have a an affinity for Block's view, as those who have paid attention to this channel and my ramblings here may have noticed. I started out life as a kind of devotee of Block's view as an undergraduate. I mean, way back in the 90s. I was pretty much a convert of Block. I thought that he was right about a lot of stuff as a sort of naive person coming to this from the first time, and especially with respect to the argument Ned had against Dennett and also against Turing and these other sorts of Turing test ideas. So cool. I certainly am open to that view. People think that I'm not because I spend so much time defending higher order theories, but I only do that because people attack them in bad ways. It's not because I think they're true. It's just that if I hear someone say something that's naively dismissive of those sorts of theories, then I kind of go, wait, no, but I don't like have any deep commitment. If they came out, if I found out higher order theories would be false, I'd be like, huh, okay, cool. I wouldn't be like in despair or sad. So I think it's certainly possible that consciousness and representation are distinct. I'm open to that view. So in that case, maybe phenomenal consciousness would have none of the relationships that you mentioned, supervenience, identity, or grounding. It would be neither. It would just be contingently a property of those phenomenally conscious states. On the other hand, I think that like the kind of higher order representation of a representation view that I um, defend in the book and other places. Um, uh, According to that view, then representations of a certain sort are identical to phenomenal consciousness. And that's what phenomenal consciousness is on that view. It just so happens to be uh, a type of representation. So there, it would be constitutive. What it is to be phenomenally conscious on the horror view is to have a certain kind of representation. And that representation might not be physical. It could be a non-physical representation. I think the horror theory could be true even if physicalism was false. Now, of course, it would be nice if physicalism were true. I mean, as you know me, I go out of my way to say, I don't know if physicalism is true. I merely think it isn't known to be false, which is a different claim. So I defend the claim that we don't know it's false, and possibly it's true, maybe even. But anyway, so in that case, you could have a version of the horror theory that said these representations just are realized in the brain in certain ways, so that the representations are brain states. But that ultimately it's the representation, which is that it's a representational theory. So I think that it could be constitutive. I think it might be not. So anyway, it depends on the kind of approach that I'm entertaining in my mind, and I do kind of split my views between this kind of identity theory where the mind equals the brain, and that's kind of view I associate with people like Ned, um, which is not representational, and the kind of horror theory, which is a kind of functionalist view, which says that it is just having a certain kind of representation. So those are like radically opposed to each other. And then you could kind of marry the two, and you might say, look, well, consciousness is a representation, but it's a neural representation. It's a representation in the form of the neural um, firings. Maybe you'd have to use the word like original representation or non-derived or something like that. So I think that you could make sense of that. And I've defended. I have a little section in a paper I wrote called "The Brain and Its States," where I kind of try to marry the horror theory to a kind of identity theory and say, look, we don't really know what these representations are. Maybe they are brain states, in which case you could have that view, and where the representational part was essential to being consciousness, but where it was grounded in the brain or something like that. So I think there's all sorts of views you could have. And myself personally, I don't feel strongly committed um, to any of them per se. So to rule out the other ones, I have different. If you gave me $1 and said spread it out amongst these views, then I would like dole it out amongst these various different candidates, and that would be that. Um, okay, so anyway, I know that's probably not the straightforward answer that you were hoping for, but that's my view. Okay, and there are non-physicalist representationalists. So I'm thinking of people like Adam Paus, who they take the view of representationalism, but they think that consciousness isn't physical. So I think that you could have a version of horror theory that was basically like that. But then so okay, good. Let's see. RO Forever Man says, given that all we ever have are experiences in consciousness, what is the belief in matter based on? Um, yeah, so I don't think that all we ever have are experiences in consciousness. I think that's an assumption that you are making and that many people make, but you don't need to make it. So I do think that idealists, and I probably assume that you're an idealist asking that kind of question. Idealism, idealists generally, not always, but typically, have a very old school theory of perception in their mind when they're thinking about these things. Something like the veil of perception, where there's like something in between me and the external world, um, which precludes me having direct contact with the external world. People like Bernardo use the analogy of the dashboard of perception, and the plane, like the dashboard, the instruments, telling you stuff about the external world, but you're not directly perceiving it. That's a very old school theory of perception, going back to the empiricists of the 17th century and the 18th century, I guess. Um, and I just don't really see why we should accept it. So I think that I do have direct contact with the external world. Um, and yeah, so what's the evidence that we don't? I'm not exactly sure. So the belief in matter, I would say, is based on direct experience with the physical world, which I can touch and encounter. Now, if by matter you mean microphysics, microscopic particles, well then the belief in electrons is based on the electron cloud chamber experiments, and what that's exactly telling us is something that we can dispute, but it's telling us something, I would say. So yeah. Oh yeah. So Zeleny just is basically saying what I just read the next comment. A little slow. Yeah, exactly. So many philosophers reject that kind of indirect realism and go for direct realism, which is what I'm talking about right now. Yeah, exactly. So direct realism, you could even be a representationalist and still accept direct realism. Um, so that you would just simply say that you're directly aware of the object and represent it as being in a certain way, and you can do both. So I don't think why we should uh, take one versus the other. And to forestall any objections, although maybe, I shouldn't forestall them, but actually just wait for them to come up and then talk about them. But anyway, to forestall those kind of objections, even idealists posit something external to the mind. So, for people like Bernardo who say that there is a mind independent world outside of my mind, it might be not, sorry, not mind independent altogether, but independent of my mind. The tree outside is not in my mind. So you could ask the same question: what reason is there for thinking that there's anything outside of your mind if all you ever have is access to experiences in your mind? It's the exact same question. And if you think you can get around it because of idealism, then you can get around of it because of physicalism too. So um, there's something external to the mind. The question is, what is its nature? The question is whether it is also mind or whether it is not mind. And I don't think we have any good reason for thinking it's not mind. In other words, that it's mindless stuff that's external to my mind and your mind. But of course, then we'd have to get into the usual debates about a priori arguments and conceptual analysis and blah, 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 at which point we're just doing regular philosophy of mind. So I don't think that this, you know, all we have is stuff in consciousness line is all that challenging rhetoric. I just think it's, kind of a easy gotcha for people who have accepted a certain view of perception. And when I had Bernardo on Consciousness Live, I asked him this question directly. I was like, "Do you think your view is based on an outdated theory of perception?" He was like, "What do you mean?" I think it is. Anyway, okay. So that's how I would respond to that. But look, I don't think that idealism is false or silly. So I think that sometimes idealists are very defensive because they're used to being ridiculed by people who are materialists, especially kind of simple-minded physicalists online. People I'm thinking of people like T Jump, who are smart but very close-minded about these other kinds of views. In my opinion, that's an opinion. So anyway, I like T Jump. I've talked to him many times. However, I do think he's very close-minded about these sorts of things. And he thinks he has answers to a lot of these problems, but he doesn't. So I recognize that there are difficulties. Um, I think of idealism as a serious option. I don't dismiss it out of hand. I don't poo-poo it. I simply say I don't think there's really good reason for accepting it. That doesn't mean that I think it's false. It just means that I don't think I have good reason for accepting it. It's an interesting and important view. I'm not saying this stuff out of like a mean-spirited rejection of idealism. I think I take idealism and panpsychism and all these forms of non-physicalism very seriously. I just think that these kind of gotcha arguments are not very good. And so anyway, that's what I think is that these people are used to arguing with a certain other kind of physicalist who is very dismissive of idealism. And these kind of gotcha claims are meant at them, are aimed at them. Okay, let's see. Larissa says, hello. I recently watched your series on Rewatched in, huh, maybe it's, anyway, so on Introduction to Philosophy and Ethics playlist. Oh, thank you. Um, I'm glad that you enjoyed them. Just before I read the next comment, I'll say that those Introduction to Philosophy and the Ethics one were recorded, I think, in 2011. I might be wrong. I think they were recorded in 2011. Maybe that's when I posted them on YouTube because I had them recorded first before I got the. I didn't really understand YouTube back in the old days, and I was sort of nervous to put these online, as you can imagine. Um, but anyway, it's a long time ago, and I don't. I every once in a while I re-listen to them, and I think to myself, huh, I would have done that differently now. I don't think I said that exactly right. I think I emphasized the wrong thing. I think I went on and on about that thing instead of this thing. So I do sort of think of them as like the product of a graduate student, which is not bad. It's just to say that, I got my PhD in 2008. And you think that getting your PhD is like this huge moment in your life. It is. You defend it and everything, but nothing really changes. You still are basically have the mentality of a graduate student. And I know I did. Even though I had a job and I was, a full-time job, I was still thinking about things in that mentality, I think. And so I noticed that when I'm rewatching those videos, I think, I wonder if this is the best way to explain that or whatever. So I think they mostly hold up, but there's definitely some parts that I would redo, especially the ethics videos. I'm very happy with like the videos on Aristotle and Kant. I think they do a okay job. But I think the stuff on relativism, I think that after having discussions with people like Lance Bass and other such characters, that I would restructure that relativism part. I think it was very much it's outdated and not helpful at this point. But I'm glad you enjoyed them, and I do stand by them. I'm not trying to say that those videos are terrible. I am just saying that I would change some things. And now I'm never will though, because it was so much effort. Actually, now I'm just fully ranting. But recording those videos was like a full-time job. I would go to class. Back in those days, I was only teaching ethics and intro to philosophy at LaGuardia, and then eventually philosophy of religion. But I was only teaching those two classes. So I had three sections of each, and I would go in and do lecture, 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 boom, bang, bomb. And then I would come home and write those PowerPoint slides. Uh, and I did that. So I got hired at LaGuardia in 2007. And I did that for like a few years where I would teach those classes, come home, write the PowerPoint slides, teach the classes, change the PowerPoint slides. And so when they finally got recorded, it had been like 3 years of that process almost of presenting them to students over and over, like, 3 times a week. And then going home and my wife would be at my wife would be at work. And so I would get home and she wouldn't be home till later. And I'd have like 4 or 5 hours to just write PowerPoint slides and draw those stupid animations that I drew and do all that stuff. So that's a tremendous amount of work. And I don't think I could ever really reduplicate that given my schedule right now, which is why if you've noticed my videos have tended towards, um, well, here's me doing logic with a digital pen with no PowerPoint slides and stuff like that. So anyway, it was a lot of work. I do appreciate that you enjoyed them. And I always feel it always makes me feel good when someone says that, and people do leave encouraging comments and say they enjoy them, and very much appreciate that. And I get the naysayers and detractors as well, whatever. I used to get very angry about that. No, I just whatever. I kind of ignore it. Okay, but would I be interested in doing a series on philosophy of science or the philosophy of law? Yeah, I would, but I don't know if you mean like a series, like doing another recorded section of those. Um, oh, I have the philosophy of mind ones too. Those ones I did all in one semester, so I didn't have that back and forth process where I would just had one semester where I would present them and then change them and then record it. And I think they didn't come out quite as well, actually. That's up for debate, I guess, but that's my assessment of it. So anyway, yeah, I would, especially philosophy of science. I think that would be very cool. But as I just said, it would almost be impossible given my teaching schedule. I mean, back then I was teaching 6 classes a year, and I thought it was a lot. Now I'm teaching 13, so it's of course even more, and that makes it very difficult. But it definitely is something that I would like to keep on the radar. Um, so thank you for that. Now, of course, any help would be appreciated. Or were you suggesting yourself playing a role, or just suggesting that you would like me to do it? All right, so let's see. Another question. What does physical essence or nature really mean if you don't consider a physical substance? Is there physical essence in some ontic structural realist view? I mean, I am sympathetic to ontic structural realism. Um, so I do think that maybe what it means to be physical can be captured in terms of ontic structural realism in my deepest and darkest moods. So I am a kind of structuralist in that sense. I do like that view. Uh, but I think that this is like a legitimate challenge to physicalism. Say, well, what do you mean by physical? And it gets really tricky because you want to say what I mean is like this glass right here. But of course, once the idealism gets on the table, then it's like, okay, if what you mean by glass is the thing over there, that's physical. then what if that's really ultimately fundamentally mental or something like that? So that's why I think the via negativa, as they say, um, that whatever fundamental reality is, it's just not mental. I think that's a good start to saying what physical is. It's just whatever it is that at the fundamental nature isn't mental. Um, so uh, whether I don't really, I'm not, essences. I go back and forth on them. Kripkeanism is committed to essences. If you believe people like Michael Devitt, so maybe there's a respectable notion of essence, which we could toss around here, maybe not. So I think that for my view, for what's important to me, as long as as long as long as consciousness ends up being no different than water or lightning, then I would be happy. So ultimately, what I really want to defend is that consciousness is not special in that sense, that it's not somehow distinct or extra or unique in nature, and that whatever water is like, a similar story can be told about consciousness. And if water turns out to be H2O, which turns out to be idealistic in nature, then I don't know. I wouldn't lose too much sleep. I would simply say, okay, so as long as you can tell the same story about consciousness that relates it to its fundamental nature in the same way, I'd be happy. So that's, I think, what's at the heart of my defense of things like physicalism is that I don't want consciousness to be special and somehow require special treatment in a way that's distinct from all the other stuff which exists. And if all the other stuff can be described mathematically and in terms of a theory of physics and fields and so forth and so on, then I would like it to be the case that consciousness fits into that picture as well. And what counts as a physical essence or ultimately is a separate question, uh, and not one that I really care about, to be honest. I don't really give a shit. So whatever it is, it's what it is. And what matters to me, as I've been saying, is that consciousness is not an outlier. And so, I think water is H2O and H2O is a physical thing. Then I want consciousness to be like that. Consciousness being something neurological, biological, whatever. So that's what's really driving me, the anti-specialness. Okay. So I don't know if that really answers your question or not, but if what the connection between physical essences and ontic structural realism is. Um, but anyway, so I am very much interested in those kinds of views. Uh, let's see. Next question. If I'm passing over questions too fast, let me know. I don't have infinite time, by the way, so I will have to kind of wrap up in a short order, but I'll try to make it through here. So, what do you think about truth? Are there areas of knowledge that have objective truths? Yeah, of course, I would say there are objective truths. Um, I'm less of a fan of knowledge. I kind of think that knowledge, I don't know. So there's a problem in epistemology called the swamping problem. And I think that knowledge is overrated. Basically, what matters is true belief, whether you call it as knowledge or not. It doesn't matter. I think what you want is true belief. So I don't really, I'm not a fan of epistemology, in case you haven't noticed. Um, you know, Tony Chang, a guy I know, a philosopher, had a shirt that said, knowledge is poo poo. I sort of agree with that. Okay, so, but objective truth, I do think so. Knowledge is one thing. I'm not exactly super excited about knowledge, but true belief is important and valuable. And I do think that there are objective truths. I kind of, vacillate. I do like pragmatism here and there, um, and I have been sort of, friends with many pragmatists in my life. But I don't really think of myself as a pragmatist. I think there are objective. I think there is objective fact about the matter about reality, um, whether consciousness is physical or not, whether eating meat is morally correct or not. I think that there are objectively stanced, independent truths to these sorts of questions. Um, so, I'm not sure why you're asking that, but yeah. So I would say there are objective truths. Zoom link. Yeah, I know. So I didn't put the Zoom link up because I probably am not going to have time to do that today. Um, because I hear people getting home early downstairs, and I do. I'll probably be wrapping up not too long. Sorry, Pooja, but I'll do it again. Or is it that everybody has their own truth? Yeah, no, I would deny that. I would deny that everyone has their own truth. Um, everyone has their own way of interpreting reality. If that's what you mean by their own truth, then I agree. But if you mean that there's something that's true for you, that's false for me. I don't think that that's the case unless you're talking about that you like, vanilla more than chocolate or something like that. Then that would be true for you, but not for me. So yeah. Timothy says, I know you had a planned interview with Block that fell through. Any plans with him to do a retry? Yeah, at the moment, there's no plans. So I don't know. I kind of got discouraged because we had already rescheduled twice, and then he's ghosted me, and then last minute cancel, and then um, I just feel like maybe he doesn't want to do it. So I'm going to sit on it, and then I'll broach the subject when I see him in person and see if I can reschedule it. But um, I know he doesn't like doing interviews. He hasn't done very many interviews, so I don't take it too personally. But also, I do take it kind of personally because he fucking did an interview with what's his name, um, Robinson, for Robinson's podcast. So what the hell? But anyway, Robinson's a nicer guy than I am, so maybe that's why. I sort of yeah. Anyway, so I do in the long term plan on trying to get him to come back, but I don't have any short term plans. And I haven't really talked to him about it since he canceled. But yeah, I'm working on it. Idealists are thus occasionalists. Yeah, interesting. I don't know what that means. If occasionalism is a view, I think it is, which that God has to intervene on every occasion of mental causation to make something happen. Is that the view? Oh, you're arguing with RO forever, man. Okay, so maybe I'll just pass over that. Um, it says if we demonstrated how or when an infant grows from the stage of experiencing reflexes and progresses to stage in which, as a child, they start to ask why type questions, are we to believe that meta problem of consciousness is solved? Um, uh, I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at. The meta problem is the question of why we think consciousness is so mysterious, and demonstrating how or when an infant goes from the stage of reflexes to asking why type question. I'm not sure how that would address the meta problem. To address the meta problem, what you want to do is to presumably explain why people find consciousness so challenging. Um, why it is that there's some people who think that it's sort of um, impossible uh, for consciousness to be physical, and there are many people who have that intuition. I don't, but I know that the people who do. So that's the meta problem. I'm not sure how what you're asking would address that. So maybe you can clarify that. And Larissa, you're right. It's a ton of work. Would Chalmers accept it as a solution? Is what you're asking. I don't think so, because of the reasons I was just saying. To solve the meta problem would be to explain why it is that people think consciousness is so mysterious. So, the types of approaches that would explain that would tell us an answer to the meta problem would be, oh, well, there's something about the way, introspection works, which makes consciousness seem mysterious. So there's something about the way first person model building works that makes consciousness seem mysterious. Um, so yeah, so Gabriel says, whatever I might think of your views, that's me, I guess. You are my favorite philosopher because, oh, thank you, because of your ability of looking, thinking, of, and presenting different views in an unbiased way. Thanks, Gabriel. That means a lot to me. I appreciate that. It's difficult, something I get a lot of shit for, actually. But yeah, I appreciate that comment. Okay, so what's driving you is hate towards substance dualism. Um, no, I think substance dualism is a legitimate possibility, and in particular in the form of quantum dualism. I think I'm very interested in quantum forms of dualism. I think um, when I was younger, I think that I sort of was very taken by the mind body problem, and then I sort of fully appreciated Hume. And then I kind of realized one day, well, who knows what causation is anyway? What the hell are we talking about? Like, we can't figure out how to account for causation in terms of physical stuff. So mind body cause, I mean, causation is just one thing following another. So, all right, if the mental thing is followed by a physical thing, then is it caused in a reliable way? I don't know. So there's a certain way of thinking about cause and effect that kind of debunks that whole problem, I would say. And I think the mind body problem that for substance dualism is overrated in many ways. I would still defend the empirical objection to substance dualism, which is that substance dualism makes a prediction that we would expect to find uncaused, seemingly uncaused events in the brain and events in the brain which seemingly don't have any causes. And we haven't ever found any such thing. Doesn't mean we won't, but at least at presently, we don't have a lot of reason for expecting that we will. So therefore, I would say um, empirically, we have good reason to kind of downplay substance dualism. Of course, once you bring in quantum versions of dualism, then maybe we don't, although it has its own problems, and you have to sort of, take seriously the idea that consciousness might play some role in collapsing the wave function, blah, 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 blah. So I would say that I don't hate substance dualism. Um, I just don't think there's any reason to believe it. Uh, and yeah, that's my view, but there's no reason to believe it, and no reason to reject physicalism. And the only reason you accept these other views is if you already had done that. So I'm not motivated to accepting it, but I think it's a serious and important view, and I think substance dualism has gotten an unfair rap. It's no more silly than any of these other views. So I don't think what's driving me is a hate for substance dualism. I hope that what's driving me is not hate. I'm hoping, but one can never be too sure. So you don't want consciousness to be an outlier. Could it be that it is the other way around, that most of reality is like consciousness, i.e., kind of out of our reach? Yeah, it certainly could be. Yeah, yeah. No, yep. I take that kind of view seriously too. My own sort of predilection is towards like there will be an end of science at which we can know everything, because I believe that there's an objective way reality is. But I also take seriously the idea that maybe there is no end to science, and there's always just more questions you can ask. um, and that it may just be at the 1,200 million years from now we're just asking newer, different questions, but we haven't like got to the completed final theory of everything. So it certainly could be that we are ultimately limited in our ability to understand the fundamental nature of reality, and that consciousness is kind of the tip of the iceberg, the seemingly ununderstandable part of which the rest is also ununderstandable. That might be a version of Mysterianism, sort of taken global or something like that. I think maybe something like that you could attribute to Chomsky in certain of his moods. So that I think that could be the case. I would just describe what I want, what's important to me, and what I would like to be the case, not what I think is true, but what I mean by physicalism, and why I'm not so worried about this. Like, what is the essence of the physical, or how do you define it? Because ultimately, my desire is simply to treat consciousness like everything else, um, and that's why I'm not super bothered by if idealism turns out to be true. Well, we still would like to treat consciousness like everything else. Something which I press with my discussion with Bernardo, for example, is that I think you get the same hard problem for idealism and panpsychism, something I talked with Philip Goff a lot about. So there is no a priori entailment from the micro consciousnesses to my consciousness. And there is no a priori entailment from the states of the mind at large to my conscious states, or at least if there is such an entailment, no one has ever produced it or even what it would look like. So I do think that even on certain versions of idealism, consciousness would be somehow special or an outlier, because there might be entailments from like watery stuff to liquid. But if you deny that in the case of consciousness to the microparticles consciousness or whatever, then you're still treating consciousness as somehow separate, which is not somehow understandable in terms of its relation to other things. So that I would ultimately, even if I were an idealist, I would want to be a kind of idealist that understood the relationship between my consciousness and the consciousness at large. Or if I were a panpsychist, I'd want to understand the relationship between my consciousness and the fundamental consciousnesses down there. So um, I would say, yeah, that's ultimately kind of why I'm not worried about some of these other issues. Let's see. Do I consider the conceivability argument trivial because of P1 that zombies are conceivable? Yeah, I do. Exactly. That's the point. So I think that if you think that zombies are conceivable, that's interesting psychological fact about yourself, not a fact about reality. Because we don't know what's ideally conceivable. We would need to know a lot more about the nature of the brain. So I say in order to really know what's ideally conceivable. And so, what I think really conceivability arguments sort of say is what the first premise of them should be is I think zombies are conceivable. Therefore, I think zombies are possible. Therefore, conclusion, I think physicalism is false. So if you add those I thinks in front, then yeah, you're stating a fact about yourself and what you find plausible. Great. If you are someone who thinks that physicalism is false because you think zombies are conceivable, more power to you. I don't think they're conceivable. Not at all. I think zombies are conceivable, physical duplicates of me that have consciousness. So that I really feel that what you find conceivable betrays already um, a lot about you. So for example, it might mean you're a dualist, or it might mean that you just think that there's no a priori entailment between consciousness and the physical stuff. All right. So yeah, the a lot of people like me object to the second premise, the link between conceivability and possibility. I want to grant them that for the sake of interfacing with their argument. I would like to say, uh, go ahead. If it's conceivable, then it is possible. And by the way, I can conceive of physical duplicates with consciousness, so they're possible, right? By your own admission. So I really think that you have to force the dualist, the non-physicalist, into accepting either a type A non physicalism, where there's an a priori connection between these things, or a type B non physicalism, which says there isn't and that you can't deduce one from the other, or type C. So I think that the same options for physicalism apply to the non physicalist. Interestingly, people like Goff have been seemingly much more open to these type A. I think Chalmers too has outed himself as a type A non physicalist, which is problematic if type A physicalism is. Okay, so I do think that's where the problem is. I wouldn't say they're trivial though, because I do think that ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, we will know whether physicalism is true or false, and we can even tell a priori. So I think that we can now know that water is H2O a priori, even though that's not the way we discovered it. We discovered it empirically, but now that we know it, we can know it a priori because we can do what Chalmers calls front loading, which is to take a bunch of empirical information and put it in the antecedent of a conditional statement. Um, so, for example, you could say, if the world is thus and such, where thus and such means a bunch of physics, then water is H2O. And you can know that sentence a priori. And then so I think that you could have a priori knowledge, but it's only after the empirical stuff comes in that you have to have the some settled stuff first. So that's where I find the problem. Are hot kinds of theories highly influenced by Freud? No, I would say definitely not. Absolutely not. So Freud, I mean, some higher order theorists are influenced by Freud. So I think there is Freudian influences on some particular theorists, but not on the theoretical framework. Interestingly, higher order theories maybe existed before Freud. So, like, and maybe Aristotle had a version of one, depending on who you talk to. Maybe Locke, depending on who you talk to. Maybe Kant, depending on who you talk to. So there's a debate about that. But certainly, I think that there's no connection really between higher theories and Freud in the general sense. Yes, Freud posited the unconscious, but the unconscious, as far as I understood it from Freud, was just containing things like beliefs and stuff. But even Freud thought that you couldn't have unconscious pains or, that you couldn't see red unconsciously. As far as I understand Freud, he thought those things were always conscious. What was unconscious on his view were simply certain beliefs, certain motivational states, like your desire to do naughty stuff with you know who and stuff, all that stuff. So I don't think that there's really much connection between Freudian views and higher order theories, uh, personally. Um, anyway, so you can enlighten me on that for if you wanted to. Let's see. User 5477 asks, what do you generally think of arguments by conceivability? And do you have a way to define slash delineate conceivability against real world possibility? Um, huh. So what I generally think of them is that they should be deprioritized, by which I mean that they should be put on the back shelf until we know more about the nature of stuff around us. So that I don't think we should be spending as much time as we do um, debating this stuff a priori, because for the very obvious reason that we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. So to me, that seems to be a problem. So that I'm not like super against conceivability arguments, except insofar as someone uses them to say, look, we know physicalism is false because insert conceivability argument. And I'm like, no, that's so I don't think they establish anything. Just like I don't think my conceivability argument establishes that physicalism is true. So I can conceive of creatures that are duplicates of me with consciousness, no non-physical properties. I can conceive of that. I don't think that proves that physicalism is true. So I just don't think they prove anything about the way the world is unless you already know that it is that way. So I think that what we get are these conditional statements, what can be known a priori, and then we need to know how the world is to know which conditional statement is the one that describes the world we're in. So how do we delineate or define the difference between the conceivability and the real world possibility? Um, well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, to be honest. Um, so the real world possibility is shown by the actuality of it, I would say, in the first instance. Um, but maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying. But I'm also kind of a skeptic about these possible things. Like, is it possible that I had tea in this glass instead of water? I don't know. Seems intuitively that is the case. I have tea downstairs. I was drinking tea earlier. Now I have water because I'm feeling very, peppy from the tea. I also was at the skate park earlier, so I got lots of exercise and I'm, feeling decent. Is it possible that I had tea in here? I don't know. It seems intuitively the case, but what does that really mean? Um, is it really possible? I don't know. Lots of issues about determinism and stuff come up. So maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're asking, but I just think that, yeah, conceivability is well, contradictoriness is a good indication that something can't be, but conceivability isn't. So inconceivability is some kind of evidence, if you can point to a contradiction. That seems to me to be the thing that we want. But I might be misinterpreting your question, so please feel free to tell me. Do I believe that first order and higher order thoughts are part of the same whole, which is conscious? Why? Uh, Well, let's see. I don't. Um, so I mean, I am open to different various views, as I think I've said many times. But when it comes to these higher order theories, the view that I defend, like for example, in my book, the horror theory says that consciousness is a higher order representation all by itself. You don't need the first order state at all. So I don't think that there's a complex relationship between the higher order state and the first order state with respect to consciousness. So I would say it's not part of the whole thing. In fact, you could have it. be missing and still have the same conscious experience. And in fact, I think of that as an empirical prediction of the view, which we would like to test. It sort of seems like a good entryway for testing. So there are other views, like Uriah Kriegel, Rocco Gennaro. They have a view that thinks of these things as kind of parts of a whole, and I don't agree with that view for various reasons. Okay, so the best line from the Russell Copplestone debate. Oh, I love the Russell Copplestone debate. Quote, I don't want to seem arrogant, but it does seem to me that I can conceive things that you say the human mind can't conceive. Yes. That's a great debate, by the way. I love that debate. It's on YouTube, I think, right? Um, yeah. So what is conceivable depends on, I would say, what background theories you have. Um, so that's the Quinean influence on me. But so something that you say can't be conceived, someone else may be conceiving it because they have a theory of the world, the way it works, and so forth and so on, that lets them do that. And certain things may seem inconceivable to you because you don't have the right theory. My favorite example is Aristotle and water. Aristotle said that water was a simple substance with no parts. So if you went back and said, no, it's made of parts, hydrogen and oxygen, he would say, what are you talking about? Like it's that's inconceivable. It's a simple substance. But that's because he had a certain theory of what that thing is, which we falsified, uh, or at least we think we falsified. I don't know. There's a big history about this, so I don't want to get into this debate. Or and another day we can get into this debate. I always recommend the book "Is Water H2O" by Hasek Chang. I think it's a great book, and I don't agree with everything, but I certainly agree with a lot of it. Um, let's see. So anyway, I love that quote. Andy, hey Andy, good to see you here, Andy Stewart. Lately, some popular philosophy YouTubers that like non-physicalism made videos stating that the interaction problem isn't really a problem at all for dualists. Is the interaction problem really a problem, or is it overrated? I think I know of the videos you speak. Is that one of them, Emerson Green? Um, I, I've seen Emerson around. I mean, on the YouTubes, and some of his videos. I know he's a panpsychist lover. I think he's sort of been converted to dualism, sort of being friendly to it after that video. I watched part of it, but I found it really hard to watch, honestly, because the person they were interviewing seemed very smug to me. But maybe just very English. I don't know. But I found also that Emerson seemed very fawning over him in a way that was strange. But oh well. Anyway, so that's just my assessment. I'm going to take it for whatever it's worth. It was hard for me to watch. I did watch part of it. So and then also I saw that Joe Schmid had Josh Rasmussen on recently, and they were talking about dualism and, well, mind first theories, as Rasmussen put it. I also didn't watch that whole video all the way through because I found that kind of frustrating. Not for any particular reason, but for various reasons. Anyway, okay, so I like all these people, by the way. I think Schmidt is um, very intelligent. I think he's super intelligent. I'm very convinced by his paper on the Grim Reaper paradox. I had already sort of been suspicious of Grim Reaper paradoxes, and you can see me arguing about it way back when on Spacetime Mind. But anyway, so I read his paper. I was like, yeah, exactly. It's just the inconsistent conjunction of two separate propositions, each of which you could separate so that there's no real objection to the infinite past. I've always thought the infinite past was a good way to defend certain cosmological arguments. Anyway, so I like Joe's work, is what I'm trying to say. I think he's very, very good philosopher, smart guy, important contributions to philosophy at such a young age. So it's very impressive. Um, and Josh Rasmussen, I don't really know him. I sort of only heard about him through that video. But anyway, so yes, these YouTubers do seem to be making this point, and I was making the same point earlier in this stream. I also think that the interaction problem is kind of overrated, because, well, as I was saying earlier, we just don't know what cause and effect really is. And once you take humanism into account, you can pretty much say whatever the hell you want. So, yeah, I'm not sure what exactly the problem is with some kind of in principle problem. Doesn't seem to me to be very defensible at this point in time. Um, yeah, I guess I don't really know what Joe's philosophy of mind is. So to be honest, um, I'd have to find out more about that. Maybe I should have him on and talk to him if he would come and talk to me. But anyway, so maybe I do sort of know because I do notice he has had a lot of non-physicalists on. Um, uh, maybe he's a non-physicalist. I don't know. So the point, though, is that I do sort of agree with them that the interaction problem is overrated if you think it's an in principle objection, that somehow it's impossible for the mind and the body being two different kinds of things to interact. I think, okay, so maybe it's not impossible. And with quantum dualism, I think that there's a serious empirical hypothesis that could be falsified, possibly, so that it's a serious view. And I do have this video on my YouTube channel about consciousness and quantum mechanics, where it's not very good audio quality. It's a talk I gave a while back to the physics department at LaGuardia. But anyway, in that talk, I tried to argue that quantum dualism should be taken as serious as any of these other views. It's an empirical claim that makes empirical predictions that we could actually falsify. So that makes it a serious view, in my opinion. So, um, however, as I also said, I think that even though there's no in principle objection to dualism and interaction, I think there's a kind of empirical objection here, which is that we just never seen anything that suggests that this is happening. So that we would expect to observe. The analogy I often use is like if there was a ghost in this room right now, like in my office where I am, if there were a ghost in some kind of non-physical presence, and could you have physical ghosts? Maybe, so whatever, ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts, but are they necessarily non-physical? Depends on what you mean. So let's just assume that there are non-physical ghosts. Well, if there was one in this room, then you would expect to observe some sort of thing that seems unexplainable. This is what the ghost people are always saying. The lights flickered, the cup moved on its own. I felt something brush past me. A coldness in the room descended. So that these are the sorts of things we would expect to see in the brain. Basically, the equivalent of the cup moving on its own. There would be some ion passing through like a sodium passing through an ion channel, which you couldn't explain why it did that, except on the basis of um, something not here. So we don't ever see a neuron suddenly spontaneously start to fire and then not have an explanation for why it started doing that. The explanation seems to be in terms of the ions moving across the cell membrane and the charges they carry and so forth and so on. The stimuli coming from the environment, blah 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 blah. So I think that uh, just to be super careful, I don't think this is conclusive evidence that dualism is false. I just think that it's a prediction that dualism makes that we've never seen. So that we could see it tomorrow. It could we dig deeper into the brain and say, oh, look at that, holy shit. But we haven't seen it yet, and the fact that we could see it, I don't think should really make us expect it. So we've been looking, and we have pretty good explanations for some stuff going on at the neural level, and not maybe the structural at the larger dynamical level of neural networks across different areas of the brain. But we're working on that so that you would expect at some point to be able to observe something um, that would suggest non-physical activity, either in this direction or that direction. So either the cup being moved, some kind of cause from that's unexplainable, or you would expect some physical event and then seeing no effect. Like the physical event, like what? Where did the effect go? It must be in the non-physical realm. So I don't really think that we have that kind of evidence. And now, also, just to finish my super careful thought, I would also say that science progresses in ways you can't predict. So, people who were alive in the 1600s had no idea that the brain used electrical uh, activity at all, let alone how it was generated. And then when electricity was discovered as a force of nature, it was quite a shock to also find out that there was electrical activity in the brain. And the idea that there was some fundamental force of nature that was also in my head was very mind blowing, to say the least, at the time. So I do think that that's a possibility too, that we could in the future tomorrow discover some new force that we don't know, some non-physical force or whatever, and then figure out, oh, look, that was there the whole time. We just didn't know about it. So I'm not closed-minded. I think that dualism could be true, but I would expect there to be some kind of pointing towards it. And I don't think we have any reason that points us towards it, except these a priori ones. And I think they can be dealt with in other ways. So that would be sort of my view about how I would think of dualism. I don't think the conservation of physics is a priori known. I think it's an empirical hypothesis that we have some reason to believe, but it's not known to be true for sure. So that would be sort of my view about that. Um, so, okay, so it says, Tim says, really the knowledge that materialism is false is based on Chalmers' 2003 type C section. I don't know who that's directed to, but I would say no, false, wrong. Uh, okay, so Moxie says, I remember Schmidt. Schmidt, is it Schmidt? Okay, so I don't know his name then. Saying he leans towards dualism. Okay, bummer. I mean, people do what they're going to do, so that's that. So the structure, dynamic nature of physical concepts plus structural dynamical circle. Okay, so you may find that convincing. I don't, and I don't see why I should. But that's cool. I mean, it's interesting to think about. All right, so I really am going to have to wrap this up soon. But let me get through a couple more of these. It says, no matter how hard you try, you cannot get outside ideas, even when you think that you got a special case that proves that there are things outside ideas, that is, idea itself. Um, yeah, that'd be great to have some argument behind that instead of just an assertion. But cool, bro. All right, so let's see. Next, have you ever had Brian Cutter? I haven't. That's a good idea. In fact, I should write that down so I remember. Um, it's a good suggestion. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Good. Final. This is the last one I'll do, and then I'll have to wrap things up. I got dinner I got to deal with, and kids are home from school and all that stuff. So a more empirical causal closure argument is a stronger argument, but independent future. Yeah, I would say something like that. But why various neurons fire in pattern X instead of pattern Y could be spontaneous, caused by soul. Currently, we have no explanation of why pattern X instead of pattern Y. Well, there I would disagree with you. I do think that uh, we do have an explanation of that. So if you look especially at some of the work like from Wolfsinger and sort of synchrony and the relation of the binding problem, that we do have some understanding of why neurons fire in the pattern that they fire in relation to the stimuli which is presented. That doesn't mean we can explain everything, but I think we have the beginning of the explanation. So I would dispute that. And Tim says, want to talk to me about Shambi's next month. Okay, great. Yeah, absolutely. I'll be sure to have the Zoom and also try to make it more reliable so that you actually know when I'm gonna show up and I don't just like say I'm gonna do it this day and then not do it. So the good news about that is that because I have these quick succession consciousness lives, April 29th, May 6th, May 7th, and then the next one is not till June. I have a few weeks in May, 3 weeks actually, and 1 week of June where I don't have anything scheduled. So I'll try to do it then. And Tim, you're more welcome to come and talk to me about that stuff. All right, cool guys. So I got to wrap it up. It's already been an hour and 40 minutes. So I wish I could hang out longer. I always enjoy these conversations. I really, not allowed to talk about this stuff at home. So this is my chance. But anyway, I do appreciate you guys coming by and having these conversations. I hope to do more, as I always am saying, but I do plan on it. In the meantime, enjoy the weather. It's been really nice out there. And, stay physical. Thanks. Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate that comment. All right, guys, take it easy.